Fusion Mobile, quality e-learning experience on the go.
You're welcome to Fusion Mobile Biology Clinic, and today we'll be discussing the circulatory system. By circulatory system we mean the blood, the pump that pumps the blood around, the pipes, or if you use that carries the blood around when the pump does the pumping, and all the structures that are involved. Those organs and structures and vessels are what will come together to make the circulatory system, which we're going to be discussing today. Alright, so first, that's the title, mammalian circulatory system. We're talking about mammals here, alright? Of course, you know that there's a circulatory system in plants as well. That will be discussed in another episode. Now, the first thing to note is that the heart is located in the center of the chest, okay? It's more to the left than it is to the right. It's about 2/3 on the left side of the chest and 1/3 of the heart is on the right side. Now, it's located in such a way that the thoracic cage, the ribs and the sternum form a protective layer or a protection over it. You remember when we talked about the skeletal system, when we said it's going to be it's such a delicate organ that cannot lie outside the chest, outside the ribs, because the ribs are there to form a protection over the heart and the lungs, which are in the chest. Now, the thoracic and abdominal cavities are separated by the diaphragm. There is a very strong muscle that separates the thoracic cavity from the abdominal cavity, and that muscle is called the diaphragm. It is such an important muscle without which you cannot breathe. That's one important thing to note about the diaphragm. The heart is divided into 4 chambers, with the 2 upper chambers known as the atria or auricles. At your level, it's fair to call them auricles, but as you go further in your medical career, if you turn out in the medical set line, you get to discover that there's a difference between the auricle and the atria. But for this level, it is fine to say the auricle is also called the atria. Now, they are relatively thin walled, meaning the auricles, while the ventricles are much thicker in their walls. Let's just say that all the blood that comes in to the heart coming through veins, okay? And there are 2 main veins that bring in blood into the heart. The first is the superior one, the one that is above the heart. That comes in from above the heart, and that's the superior vena cava. And then there is an inferior one, the one that comes in from below the heart. That is the inferior vena cava. And these 2 enter the right atrium, bringing in blood to the atrium. Okay, and of course you know that the kind of blood they will be bringing into the atrium is blood from every other structures in the body. The one above brings in blood from the head and from the 2 arms, while the ones from below, the inferior vena cava, brings in blood from your lower limbs, the 2 legs, and then your abdomen, your tummy area, bringing all the blood from this area through the inferior vena cava to the right atrium. Now, the blood is circulated in such a way that they move in only one direction. They move in the unidirectional flow. That's because you don't want blood flowing back the way it came. No, that's going to be hazardous. So for blood to flow in a unidirectional manner, there has to be some structures we call valves. Valves are like gates that close immediately the blood passes, so that the blood doesn't flow back. Okay, now these valves separate the right atrium from the right ventricle, and separate the left atrium from the left ventricle as well. And then they also separate the ventricles from the pulmonary vessels. So the valves that separate the right atrium from the right ventricle are called the tricuspid valves. They are called tricuspid because there are 3 of them, and they look like a cusp. They form a cusp. These valves are arranged in such a way that they prevent the backflow of blood from where it's coming from. Okay, blood is meant to flow in a unidirectional manner. Okay, now there are different valves. There is a valve that demarcates the right ventricle from the right atrium. There is that demarcates the left ventricle from the left atrium, and there is yet another valve that demarcates the ventricles from the great vessels, the pulmonary vessels. Okay, so let's take the first valve. It's called the tricuspid valve, and that's the valve that separates the right atrium from the right ventricle. Now it gets the name tricuspid from the fact that there are 3 in number, and they are cusp shaped. They're shaped like cusp. Okay, So that's why we call them the tricuspid valve, and they separate the right atrium from the right ventricle. On the left, we have the left atrium and left ventricle being separated by a mitral valve. Okay, mitral valve is also called bicuspid valve. It's called bicuspid because there are two of them, bi standing for two, and they are cusp shaped. It's also called a mitral valve because it looks like a mitre. The mitre is that cap that Catholic bishops wear. See the way their caps are, it doesn't really cover the entire head, it just stays somewhere in the center of the head. That's called a mitre. That cap is called a mitre, and that's where the valve got its name from. Okay, now the other valve we talked about are semilunar valves. Semilunar valves are valves that separate the ventricles from the great vessels. That means the semilunar valve separates the right ventricle from the pulmonary vessels. Do you understand me now? Okay, so they are called semilunar because they are shaped. When you hear something lunar, it's like the moon. They are half moon shaped. Okay, that's why they're called semilunar shaped valves. Then the next thing you have to note, which we can see in the note as well, is the fact that the heart has a protective casing. Okay, this casing is called the pericardium. The pericardium is a membrane that protects the heart. It's like a bag in which the heart is sitting. Alright, so next we're going to look at the arteries and the blood vessels that carry blood away from the heart. Alright, the truth is that vessels are arranged such that they can bring blood into the heart, or they can carry blood away from the heart. Now it's very simple for you to remember. A goes with A. Okay, arteries carry blood away from the heart, while veins bring blood back to the heart. Okay, arteries carry blood away from the heart to other organs in the body, while the veins bring blood back to the heart from other organs in the body. Now, the arteries are thick-walled, they are muscular, and they are elastic, so as to withstand the high pressure with which the heart pumps the blood. You know, we said arteries carry blood away from the heart, and blood is the heart is pumping blood at a very, very high pressure. If you use something that is thin-walled, you know, to connect to the heart, for the heart to pump blood out, it's going to rupture. The pressure with which the heart is pumping the blood will rupture that vessel. So that is why the arteries are modified in such a way that they are thick enough to withstand that high pressure with which the heart pumps out blood. While the veins, on the other hand, are thin-walled because they are bringing blood to the heart, and the blood that is coming back to the heart is at a low pressure actually. Okay, now the arteries divide into smaller arterioles, which further subdivide several times to form a dense network of highly microscopic vessels called the capillaries. The capillaries are thinner, way thinner and smaller than the arteries. Okay, arteries become arterioles, arterioles become capillaries. It is via the capillaries that the arteries are linked with the veins. Okay, now the capillaries are actually very thin-walled, so that substances can freely permeate from the capillaries into the tissues and back. Okay, for such for the ease of exchange of materials between the blood and other surrounding tissues, the capillaries have to be thin-walled. Now, capillaries are tiny vessels whose walls are 1 cell thick, so that water and dissolved substances can diffuse freely in and out. The capillaries unite into larger vessels which join to form veins which return blood to the heart. We mentioned that earlier. Then we said that veins are the blood vessels that take blood back to the heart. Veins are wider and have thinner walls than arteries. Okay, take note of this. Arteries are narrower. Okay, the bore, the passage for blood in an artery is narrower, and that's because it's thicker. It has more muscles in it. Okay, it's more elastic, it has more muscles, so it is, and the lumen is actually thinner than the vein. The vein is actually wider. The bore, the lumen of the vein is wider, but the wall is much thinner. And we said the walls of the vein is thinner because it brings in blood at low pressures to the heart, as against the arteries that carry blood at high pressures away from the heart. Now, they have valves along their length which prevent backflow of blood. Veins have valves. Okay, veins have valves because they are bringing blood back to the heart. They don't want the blood that is coming back to the heart to flow back. That would be dangerous. Okay, blood is meant to flow in just one direction. and it is that valve that allows for blood to flow in one direction. The moment the blood passes the valve closes, blood passes, valve closes. You know, it's like a gate that allows substances to pass only in one direction and not the other way around. Alright, so we are going to see a little diagrammatic illustration of blood, how the blood flows in the heart.
Fusion Mobile, quality e-learning experience on the go.
The diagram we're looking at right now is a diagram of the heart, okay? That's the entire chest, and it's the heart sitting in the cavity we talked about earlier. We said that the thorax is designed in such a way that the ribs form a protective cage, or a protective casing, if you use that word, for the heart and the lungs in that area. Okay, so if you allow me, I would like to illustrate further where the lungs fit in this diagram. Well, the lungs are something like this. Okay, we have a right lung and the left lung. Now, the heart is found sitting comfortably between these two lungs. Okay, and now we have a right and a left. Now I'm going to label this the left lung and this the right lung. I'm labeling left and right depending on the patient himself, or the person whose picture we are using. It's not your own left, it's not my own left. It is the patient's left and his right. Okay, and below these structures you see, below the heart and the lungs, you now have a very important muscle. The muscle we talked about earlier, we say it's called the diaphragm. Now, unlike other muscles in your body that you see that you have to lift weights and all that to make it expand and all that, this one is one muscle that works for the rest of its life. Okay, right from when you are formed in your mother's womb, this muscle begins to work, because if the muscles are not working, right from when you are born, actually not from your mother's womb, right from when you are born, right from when you begin to breathe in by yourself, these muscles begin to contract. Okay, because they are the muscles you need for respiration. They are the muscles you need for you to take in air and bring out air. Okay, now the diaphragm, like we said earlier, divides the cavities. It separates the thoracic cavity from the abdominal cavity. So it forms the floor of the thoracic cavity and the roof of the abdominal cavity. Okay, now this entire space you are looking at is called the thorax, or the thoracic cavity. Okay, now what exactly does this heart do for us? Now let's make this diagram a little more heart specific. Alright, so I want to make this diagram a little more heart specific. We want to zone in on the heart now. We're getting out the lungs and the rib cage and everything. The diaphragm is out. All we're looking at right now is just the heart. Okay, now looking at it, it's a very beautiful organ. Okay, it's very colorful. It's very muscular. It has some very great vessels, and they are differentiated in their color codings. We use a different color to differentiate the different vessels for a purpose. Okay, the red ones are the arteries and the blue ones are the veins. Alright, now these smaller vessels you're looking at, the smaller arteries and veins you're looking at, are actually called coronary vessels. That means the coronary artery and the coronary veins. They are called coronary because they have to do with the heart. Whenever you hear the word cardiac or coronary, we're talking about the heart. Now, what that means is that these vessels are supplying the heart. The heart is a muscle, okay? It's a pump. It supplies to other people, but it's not like a conductor that just calls in passengers into the bus and hangs on the bus. No, it calls in passengers and it also sits in the bus and enjoys it with them. Alright, it gives blood to other vessels, it gives blood to other organs, and also gives some to itself. So the vessels by which the heart gives blood to itself are called the coronary vessels, and then they are the coronary arteries and the coronary vein, as you can see in this diagram. Please, my phone don't lock while I explain. I beg no verse. This phone will go cover me. Now I flow. Yes. Alright, so now we've explained the coronary vessels. The next we want to talk about is the heart now as a pump. Now we regard the heart as one of the most important organs and the most hardworking organs. That is because right from when you were in your mother's womb, at about the 5th week of life, that's the 5th week of your mother's pregnancy, even before you were born, the heart begins to pump. And right from then, when it begins to pump, it pumps all the way through till you die. There's no break, there is no resting. That is one organ that continues to function until the person dies. The day your heart decides that it's going to rest or it's tired of pumping, that's the day the person dies. So by that you can say the heart is the most hardworking organ in the entire body. Alright? Now, looking at it now, you can see some very great vessels. Okay? There's a blue one and there's a red one that is archy, that is like an arc. Okay, that is curved like an arc. Now, I want to make it a little more simplified, so let's use a more simple diagram. Alright? Now, this diagram you're looking at is a more simplified diagram of the heart. Okay? Now, let's say we have a diagram of you, for instance. Now, let's say we're drawing you. That's your head, your neck, your arms. Okay? We have your heart in the middle of your chest. Okay? Now, and this, imagine that these are your legs now. Okay? Now, the aim of this whole thing is to make blood to pump to and from the heart. Okay? Actually, we want to send all the blood coming from the upper part of your body and the blood coming from the lower part of your body. We want to send everything to the heart. And then we want the heart as well to pump all this blood back to different organs and tissues. Okay, now we want to illustrate the vessels and by the means by which this is achieved. Okay, so from the left arm, for instance, and from the right arm and from the head, blood will come, and all these three sources of blood will come together into one big vein, and that's called the superior vena cava, and that will enter into the heart through the atrium. Then separately there will be veins coming from both legs and joining the vessels coming from the stomach, the abdomen and all the structures, and all this together come into the heart through the vessel we call the inferior vena cava. Now, let's take note of this. Whenever we have vein, we are saying the blood is going towards the heart. Okay? The vein is this vessel that brings water towards the heart. Now, away from the heart, that will be the aorta. Okay? The aorta will pump blood away from the heart through veins to other organs. Okay? Now we are going to represent the aorta with a red diagram now. Okay? Let's say this is an arch now. That's the aortic arch, and it gives a vessel to the head, it gives a vessel to both arms, and then the arch now further goes down, it goes all the way down to supply the legs. Okay? That is how the aorta divides through arteries to supply different structures in the body, carrying blood away from the heart. So remember I said A goes for A. Artery carries blood away from the heart. Alright? So now blood coming from the head and neck and from the lower limb come in through the superior vena cava, and then blood coming in from the lower part of your body comes in through the inferior vena cava, and they all enter the chamber of the heart called the right atrium. Okay, we've discussed this before. We said the superior vena cava is the vein that comes into the heart from the top. Alright, while the inferior vena cava is the one that brings in blood. Yeah, the inferior vena cava brings in blood from the lower part of the body into the heart. Now, these two directions are the main directions that blood comes into the heart. Of course, blood comes in from the coronary vessels into the heart, but we're not going to talk about that now. Now, the blood coming into the right atrium have to go in only one direction, and it gets there into the right ventricle through the valve we mentioned earlier. We said it's called the tricuspid valve. As you can see, they only move in one direction, the direction this arrow is showing. Alright, and this valve is called the tricuspid valve because there are three of them. I mentioned that earlier. Okay, 3 for tri, and then the cuspid part because it looks like a cusp. Okay, now from here, where do you think this blood will go on to next? This blood is going to move all the way through this first semilunar valve. Okay, it goes in through the semilunar valve, in through this large vessel. Okay, goes in through this large vessel, and this vessel is called, this valve first of all is called a pulmonary valve. Okay, I said there are two types of semilunar valves. We have the pulmonary valve, okay, and then we have the aortic valve. Now we'll talk about the aortic valve later, but this one that allows the blood to flow in one direction into the pulmonary vein is called the pulmonary valve. Okay, now just remember that the blood that is coming now is coming from other structures of the body. That means the blood has given up oxygen to those structures of the body and it is coming out deoxygenated. So blood coming into the heart is deoxygenated, meaning it doesn't have oxygen. And that is why such blood is blue. Unlike blood leaving the heart, which is oxygenated blood, and that blood is red.
Fusion Mobile, quality e-learning experience on the go.
Alright, so this is our left pulmonary artery, and that's because it's taking blood away from the heart, while this is our right pulmonary artery. Okay, it's also taking blood away from the heart into the right lung. Now the blood from the lungs now pick up oxygen. Having picked up oxygen, now goes back into the heart. Having picked up oxygen, this blood is now red. Okay, now the blood coming in will now come in through the pulmonary vein. Okay, this on the right is the right pulmonary vein, and this on the left is the left pulmonary vein. Okay, now apart from oxygen, like I said, the blood brings in the vessels bring in blood containing metabolic products as well. So not just oxygen, but metabolic products make the blood blue in color. Now this vessel here is going to be called our left pulmonary vein.
I think the flow of this video.
Okay. Bless, I want to forget.
No, you never suffocate.
Since my face will not be showing much, make I just off my shirt after the record.
Yeah, let's finish now. We soon finish.
Alright, so now blood will come back through this way and dumps into this chamber, the left atrium. The blood has to dump in the left atrium, just as the same way we have an atrium on the right called the right atrium, and then through the left atrium it moves into the left ventricle. Okay, now remember this blood is now oxygenated because it has picked oxygen from the lungs. Okay, now having come into the left ventricle, of course through the valve, the mitral valve or the bicuspid valve we mentioned earlier, and as you can see it's only in one direction to make sure that blood flows in a unidirectional manner. Now the blood has only one more way to go, and that way is through the last valve, the last semilunar valve, which is called the aortic valve. The aortic valve. Okay, now the aortic valve leads the blood. It opens for the blood to move from the ventricle into the aorta. Okay, the aorta acts forward like that and gives off three branches that go to the upper limb, to the neck, and the two upper limbs and the neck. Okay, so this is how the blood flows through the heart, flowing through the four chambers of the heart. And the four chambers, we labeled them earlier as the right atrium, from which blood enters into the right ventricle, which is number 2 chamber, and from the right ventricle the blood goes into the pulmonary vessels and then come back through the left atrium, and then finally it finds its way into the left ventricle.
Tuition Mobile, quality e-learning experience on the go.